Have you ever wondered what happens when loyalty is tested in the shadows of war? When a single decision can brand you as either a hero or a traitor? Imagine yourself walking through a war-torn village, where the line between ally and enemy blurs with every step you take. What would you do if you discovered an American soldier accused of the unthinkable? Before we continue with this shocking story that the history books tried to erase, please comment where you're watching from and subscribe to help us continue bringing these hidden war stories to light. Your support means everything as we uncover the truths that powerful forces don't want revealed. The morning of November 9th, 1944, dawned with an unusual stillness over the recently liberated French village of Saint-Michel-sur-Marne, just 20 miles from the German border. The autumn air carried a biting chill as Private First Class Thomas Running Bear moved silently through the misty streets. A member of the Navajo Nation from Arizona, Running Bear served as a translator and scout with the 101st Airborne Division, his unique skills making him invaluable to intelligence operations. Running Bear had been dispatched to investigate reports of unusual activity in an abandoned church compound at the edge of the village. Local resistance fighters claimed to have heard American voices arguing late into the previous night, followed by screams that ended abruptly in the pre-dawn hours. What he discovered in the courtyard behind the stone chapel would haunt him for decades to come. Lieutenant Ellen Chambers, a 26-year-old Army nurse from Biloxi, Mississippi, stood bound to a wooden post, her wrists secured behind her back with military-grade rope. Her once pristine white uniform was stained with mud and what appeared to be dried blood. Around her neck hung a crudely painted wooden sign bearing a single word: traitor. Running Bear approached cautiously, scanning the surroundings for threats. The compound seemed deserted, yet he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Lieutenant Chambers raised her head weakly as he drew near. Her face was bruised, one eye swollen shut, but recognition flickered in her gaze. "They'll come back," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Get out while you still can." Running Bear worked quickly to free her, all the while maintaining vigilant watch over the courtyard perimeter. "Who did this to you, Lieutenant?" he asked, his fingers working at the knots binding her wrists. "Americans," she replied, the word hanging between them like a death sentence. The discovery sent shockwaves through the command structure of the regional Allied forces. Lieutenant Chambers and Private Running Bear were immediately separated and transported to different secure locations for debriefing. The official report filed that day by Captain Harlan Mitchell of Army Intelligence contained a single paragraph about the incident, followed by 7 pages that would remain classified until 2007. At 0900 hours, a field nurse assigned to the 21st Field Hospital was recovered from apparent enemy detention in the Saint-Michel region. Preliminary questioning suggests possible compliance with enemy forces. Investigation ongoing. What this report failed to mention was the existence of Operation Nightshade, a clandestine mission authorized by generals whose names were deliberately omitted from all documentation. Nightshade operated in the gray areas of warfare, targeting high-value intelligence assets through means that violated the Geneva Convention. Ellen Chambers had not been a random victim. Before the war, she had completed her medical training at Johns Hopkins University, where she specialized in experimental treatments for traumatic brain injuries. Her research had caught the attention of military intelligence, leading to her somewhat unusual field assignment near frontline operations. 3 weeks before her discovery by Running Bear, Lieutenant Chambers had been treating wounded from the fierce fighting in the Ardennes forest. Among the casualties was a German officer who had been captured unconscious, but carrying documents indicating he was Dr. Heinrich Weber, a neurologist whose work on brain trauma paralleled Chambers' own research. From her personal journal, recovered from her quarters at the field hospital. October 18th. The German doctor regained consciousness today. His English is impeccable, barely accented. He claims to have studied at Columbia before the war. We discussed treatment protocols for concussive injuries while I changed his bandages. For a moment, I almost forgot we're supposed to be enemies. There's something about his eyes that suggests he's seen the same horrors I have. Perhaps in another life, we could have been colleagues. What Lieutenant Chambers couldn't have known was that Weber was not who he claimed to be. His real name was Dieter Strauss, a high-ranking member of the Ahnenerbe, the Nazi scientific research division notorious for its brutal human experimentation. Strauss had been en route to a secret facility in Bavaria when his transport was attacked by Allied bombers, leaving him the sole survivor. The coincidence of finding an American nurse with expertise matching his own was too valuable an opportunity for Strauss to ignore. During his 2 weeks of recovery at the field hospital, he carefully cultivated a relationship with Chambers, extracting information about American medical advances while sharing just enough of his own knowledge to maintain her interest. Sergeant William Blackwood of the military police had noticed the unusually lengthy treatment sessions Chambers conducted with the German prisoner. On November 3rd, he filed a report with his commanding officer, Major Frank Reynolds. "Sir, I believe Lieutenant Chambers may be compromised. On 3 separate occasions, I've observed her sharing medical journals with the German POW in Ward C. Yesterday, she provided him with paper and writing implements, which she later collected and placed in her personal effects, rather than submitting them for intelligence review." Reynolds dismissed Blackwood's concerns, noting that medical personnel often developed professional rapport with patients regardless of their status. This dismissal would later be scrutinized during the subsequent investigation. On the night of November 8th, the German prisoner disappeared from the field hospital. Initial assumptions pointed to an escape, possibly with assistance from sympathizers in the local population. A search of the surrounding area was initiated but yielded no results. What actually transpired was far more sinister. Elements within American intelligence had been monitoring the interactions between Chambers and the German doctor. Operation Nightshade, designed to extract and exploit enemy scientific knowledge, saw an opportunity. Without authorization from the regular chain of command, Nightshade operatives removed Strauss from the hospital and transported him to a black site for intensive interrogation. Lieutenant Chambers, returning from treating casualties at an aid station closer to the front, discovered the patient missing and immediately reported it to hospital security. Her genuine concern was misinterpreted as distress over the loss of a valuable intelligence asset, one she had potentially been compromised by. From the classified testimony of Captain James Wheeler, Operation Nightshade, we had no choice but to consider Lieutenant Chambers a security risk. The level of information she had shared with Strauss exceeded any reasonable medical necessity. When we questioned her about their conversations, she refused to provide complete transcripts, claiming doctor-patient confidentiality. In wartime, such naivety constitutes a threat to operational security. Wheeler's report neglected to mention that the Nightshade team had staged Chambers' arrest as a German sympathizer to maintain their cover story. The public humiliation, binding her to a post with a traitor sign, was meant to discourage questions from other medical personnel while they determined the extent of her involvement. They had not anticipated Private Running Bear's arrival, nor the complications his discovery would create. Thomas Running Bear's role in this incident might have been forgotten entirely, if not for the letter he sent to his brother in 1977, shortly before his death from lung cancer. "I never told anyone the whole truth about that day in France. When I found the nurse, she wasn't just tied to that post. She had papers stuffed in her pockets, medical diagrams and notes written in both English and German. She begged me to destroy them before they came back. I didn't understand who they were. I assumed Germans. Now I'm not so certain. I burned those papers as she asked. May God forgive me if I made the wrong choice. The look in her eyes. It wasn't fear of the enemy, brother. It was fear of our own men. Ellen Chambers disappeared from military records after November 19, 1944. Her family received a telegram stating she had been killed by enemy action near the German border. A closed-casket funeral was held in Biloxi, with a flag-draped coffin that multiple sources later confirmed was empty. The official investigation into the Saint-Michel incident concluded with a tersely worded statement. Security breach contained. Asset neutralized. Operation continues under revised protocols. For 60 years, the story remained buried in classified archives and the fading memories of those few who had witnessed fragments of the truth. Then, in 2004, construction workers renovating an old sanatorium in Maryland discovered a hidden room in the basement level. Inside was evidence of long-term occupancy and years of journal entries scratched into the plaster walls. The writings told a disturbing story of a woman held against her will, subjected to treatments designed to erase her memories of what she had seen and heard. The final entry, dated April 12, 1959, read simply, "They're moving me again. If anyone finds this, my name is Ellen Chambers. I was a nurse. I am not a traitor." FBI agents quickly secured the site, but not before local reporters photographed portions of the wall. Within days, the photographs had vanished from newsroom archives, and the workers who made the discovery reported being visited by men claiming to be from the Department of Defense Historical Review Division. Dr. Rebecca Whitehorse, a historian specializing in Native American contributions to military intelligence, stumbled upon Running Bear's letter while researching Navajo code talkers in 2011. Her investigation led her to declassified fragments of Operation Nightshade files, though significant portions remained heavily redacted. What's clear from the available evidence, Dr. Whitehorse wrote in her controversial paper, Friendly Fire, Collateral Damage in Shadow Operations, is that Lieutenant Chambers became an inconvenient witness to an operation that violated not only international law, but America's own stated principles. Whether she was genuinely collaborating with the enemy or merely caught in a web of intelligence manipulation may never be known. What is certain is that the machinery of war consumed her without hesitation. The Department of Defense issued a statement dismissing Whitehorse's conclusions as speculative and unsupported by the factual record. Her university tenure was subsequently denied, and her research funding mysteriously evaporated. In 2015, an elderly man named Franz Keller died in a nursing home in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Among his possessions was a journal containing detailed accounts of scientific work conducted during and after World War II. Keller described himself as a colleague of Strauss, who had been rescued by the Americans when Berlin fell. One entry from 1952 described a visit to a secure facility in Maryland. They brought me to see her today, the nurse who treated Dieter during his captivity. She didn't recognize me, of course. The treatments have been quite thorough in that regard. They wanted my assessment of whether any memories might eventually resurface. I told them what they wanted to hear, but the truth is more complex. The human mind is not so easily erased. Somewhere beneath the fog we've imposed, Ellen Chambers still exists, still remembers, still waits. The connection between Keller's journal and the Maryland sanatorium has never been officially acknowledged, despite multiple Freedom of Information Act requests filed by journalists and historians. In a small museum on the Navajo Nation reservation, a display honors Thomas Running Bear's military service, including his Bronze Star and Purple Heart. A small, easily overlooked photograph shows him standing beside a military hospital tent. In the background, barely visible, a female nurse tends to a patient. The museum curator, when asked, identifies her as possibly Lieutenant Ellen Chambers, though no official record confirms this. What truly happened to Ellen Chambers after her discovery in that French courtyard remains one of the war's most closely guarded secrets. Did she betray her country by sharing medical knowledge with an enemy combatant? Was she an unwitting pawn in an intelligence operation that spiraled beyond control? Or was she, as some evidence suggests, a victim of America's own shadow war, one fought not just against external enemies, but against truth itself? Former CIA analyst Martin Davidson, speaking anonymously to researchers in 2018, offered perhaps the most chilling assessment. Operations like Nightshade were about more than just gathering enemy intelligence. They were proof of concept for methods of control and coercion that would evolve in the decades following the war. Chambers wasn't important because of what she knew. She was important because she represented an opportunity to perfect techniques that would serve intelligence agencies well into the Cold War and beyond. The village of Saint-Michel-sur-Marne no longer exists on modern maps. After the war, the area was designated a military training zone, and the local population relocated. The church where Chambers was found was demolished in 1962 for reasons never publicly disclosed. Local legends persist, however. Elderly residents of nearby communities speak of lights sometimes seen moving through the abandoned village at night, and of a woman's voice calling out in English. They cross themselves when telling these stories, attributing the phenomena to restless spirits seeking justice denied them in life. As the sun set over the Arizona desert in 1993, Thomas Running Bear's son, Michael, claimed his father spoke his final words. "I should have taken her with me. They weren't coming back for her. They were coming for me." When pressed about what his father meant, Michael Running Bear shook his head. He never talked about the war. Whatever happened over there, he carried it like a stone in his heart. All I know is he made me promise to tell his story someday, when it was safe. I'm still waiting for that day to come. In 2019, a cache of documents surfaced during the renovation of a former military administrative building in Arlington, Virginia. The documents, sealed in a lead-lined box within a wall cavity, contained what appeared to be medical records, intelligence briefings, and personal correspondence dating from 1944 to 1967. Before government officials could secure the materials, several pages were photographed by construction workers and subsequently appeared on various internet forums dedicated to military history and conspiracy theories. These fragments revealed a far more complex operation than previously understood. Operation Nightshade hadn't been merely an intelligence-gathering mission. It represented the convergence of multiple clandestine projects aimed at leveraging enemy scientific advances while ensuring America's moral authority remained publicly unblemished. A memorandum dated December 3, 1944, addressed to a Colonel Whitaker from Dr. George E. Duantorns, Chaidorje, described the successful acquisition of both German subjects and supporting documentation. It continued, "The female asset continues to present complications. Standard memory suppression protocols have proven ineffective. Recommend transfer to Facility 7 for enhanced procedures." Another document, bearing the letterhead of a now-defunct department within the War Office, outlined what it called the Chambers Protocol, a detailed methodology for identifying and neutralizing potential security breaches within medical units serving in forward positions. Medical personnel present unique security challenges due to their professional ethical frameworks, which may conflict with military necessity. The Chambers incident demonstrates the need for specialized handling of such cases. What these documents revealed piece by disturbing piece, was that Ellen Chambers had become more than just a witness to be silenced. She had become an experimental subject in the very research she had once conducted. In the small town of Millfield, Ohio, 93-year-old retired Army nurse Margaret Holloway granted a rare interview to a local historical society in 2021. Holloway had served with the 21st Field Hospital during the latter stages of the European campaign. We were told Ellen had been captured by the Germans during an advance, then killed while trying to escape. We all wore black armbands for a week, but there were whispers. Things that didn't add up. Her personal effects were collected by men we'd never seen before, not the usual chaplain's assistants. And the German patient she'd been treating, everyone pretended he had never existed at all. Holloway paused, her weathered hands trembling slightly as she continued. A month after Ellen disappeared, I was treating a soldier with shell shock. During a nightmare, he grabbed my arm and called me Ellen. He begged forgiveness for what they did to you in the churchyard. When I asked him about it later, he claimed not to remember anything. 3 days after that, he was transferred. No paperwork, no explanation. He was just gone. The most disturbing revelation came from a series of medical reports found among the Arlington documents. They detailed the application of experimental treatments derived from both American and acquired German research on memory manipulation. Subject EC447, presumably Ellen Chambers, was described as demonstrating remarkable resilience to conventional techniques and concerning periods of lucidity in which previous memories resurface. A report dated February 19, 1945 stated, "Subject continues to request contact with the Indian soldier who she claims will verify her story. Recommendation: fabricate evidence of said soldier's death to eliminate this psychological anchor point." In a remote corner of the National Archives, historian Laura Chen discovered shipping manifests from Operation Paperclip, the well-documented program that brought Nazi scientists to America after the war. Among the scientific equipment transported was a crate labeled only as Strauss Protocols, Subject Maintenance. The destination was listed as Facility 7, Maryland. Chen's attempts to cross-reference this with other Operation Paperclip documentation met with unusual resistance. I was told those specific records were damaged in a storage facility flood in 1973, she later wrote. When I pointed out that the facility in question hadn't been constructed until 1976, my research credentials were temporarily suspended pending an administrative review. The threads connecting these discoveries led to increasingly disturbing conclusions. Ellen Chambers had not merely witnessed something she shouldn't have, she had become integral to something far more sinister. Dr. James Forrester, who served as a psychiatric consultant to several government agencies during the Cold War, provided this assessment before his death in 2014. The perfect subject for memory experimentation would be someone with prior knowledge of brain function, someone who could articulate the effects of the treatments in scientific terms even as they were experiencing them. If this nurse had specialized in neurological trauma, she would have been an invaluable test case for techniques the government was desperate to perfect as the Cold War escalated. Thomas Running Bear's involvement might have remained a footnote in this dark history, if not for the persistence of his granddaughter, Dr. Sarah Running Bear. A neurologist herself, she began investigating her grandfather's wartime experiences after finding a locked box among his possessions. The box contained a single item, a torn piece of white fabric with a nurse's insignia, stained with what DNA testing would later confirm was blood from 2 different individuals. Sarah Running Bear's investigation led her to retired Army intelligence officer Colonel Harold Mitchell in 2023. Mitchell, then in hospice care, agreed to an interview he specified could only be released after his death. "Your grandfather was more than just a translator," Mitchell told her. "The military recognized that many Native American soldiers possessed observational skills and fieldcraft that exceeded our conventional training methods. They were often assigned to special reconnaissance and intelligence assessment roles that never appeared in their official records." When shown a photograph of Ellen Chambers, Mitchell's reaction was visceral. "My God, they told us she died in '67. Are you saying she's still alive?" Mitchell's subsequent disclosure painted a picture of interconnected intelligence operations spanning decades, with Ellen Chambers and Thomas Running Bear representing opposing facets of America's shadow war. Running Bear was assigned to assess whether Chambers had been compromised by the German doctor. His report, which never entered the official record, concluded she was innocent of collaboration. But by then, Nightshade had already incorporated her into their experimental protocols. They couldn't release her without admitting what they'd done. The transcripts of Mitchell's interview contained a revelation that would reshape our understanding of both Chambers and Running Bear's fates. "Your grandfather attempted to extract her from the Maryland facility in 1947. He had assembled documentation proving her innocence and secured promises of congressional intervention. The night before he was to present his evidence, his Jeep went off a mountain road in Virginia. The official report called it an accident, but everyone in intelligence circles understood the message. Thomas Running Bear survived the accident, but spent 6 months recovering from his injuries. During that time, all his documentation regarding Chambers disappeared. When he resumed his military service, he was assigned to remote postings far from the corridors of power where he might have pursued justice for the nurse he had found in that French courtyard. The most shocking discovery came in 2024, when an anonymous source provided the Washington Post with medical records from a private care facility in northern Maine. The facility, operated under contract to various government agencies, had closed in 2012. Among its long-term residents was a woman admitted in 1959 under the name Eleanor Caldwell. Her medical chart noted a history of confabulation and persistent false memory syndrome, particularly regarding claimed identity as a military nurse. Attached to these records were photographs taken at 5-year intervals as part of the patient's documentation. Facial recognition software applied to these images and compared to the known photographs of Lieutenant Ellen Chambers returned a 97% probability match. The woman had died in 2008 at the age of 90. According to facility records, no family members were notified, and her remains were cremated as per standing instructions from her conservator, listed only as Department 7G. Perhaps most heartbreaking was the final note in her file, written by a nursing assistant 2 days before her death. "Patient became unusually lucid this evening. Correctly identified the current president and year. Asked for paper to write a letter to Thomas, the soldier who found me." When I explained that wasn't possible, she smiled and said, "He'll find me again. On the other side," he promised. These were her last coherent words. The implications of these discoveries extended far beyond one nurse's tragic fate. Operation Nightshade appeared to have evolved into various Cold War mind control programs, many of which remain classified today. The techniques refined through Ellen Chambers' unwilling participation would later be applied in theaters from Vietnam to Afghanistan. In 2025, a Freedom of Information Act request revealed a partial transcript of a 1965 congressional hearing held behind closed doors. The heavily redacted document contained testimony from a doctor regarding the remarkable advances in cognitive manipulation achieved through sustained clinical observation of subject EC. When questioned about the ethical implications, Dr. S. reportedly responded, "Gentlemen, Wars are won not merely by those willing to die for their country, but by those willing to bear moral burdens so that others may maintain their innocence. The subject's contribution to national security cannot be overstated, regardless of how it was obtained. The hearing concluded with a unanimous vote to continue funding the program under even deeper cover. A handwritten note in the margin of the transcript, initialed LBJ, read simply, "Ensure no connection to paperclip can ever be established." This never happened. The village where Running Bear found Chambers has remained off-limits to the public for over 80 years, officially designated as a contaminated munitions testing area. However, satellite imagery analyzed in 2022 revealed no evidence of such contamination. Instead, ground-penetrating radar identified what appears to be an underground structure beneath the former church courtyard, a structure that matches no historical record of the original village. French authorities have denied requests for archaeological investigation, citing ongoing security agreements with NATO allies. 3 times in the decades following the war, individuals connected to the Saint-Michel incident died under questionable circumstances, just as they were preparing to come forward with information. Captain James Wheeler, the Operation Nightshade officer who had overseen Chambers' initial detention, was found dead in his Washington, D.C. apartment in 1971, the night before he was scheduled to testify before a Senate subcommittee on intelligence overreach. His death was attributed to heart failure despite no prior cardiac history. Dr. Heinrich Weber, or Dieter Strauss, vanished from his government laboratory in 1953. No investigation was ever publicly acknowledged, though internal memoranda described his absence as a resource limitation requiring project adjustment. In 1989, journalist Catherine Monroe disappeared while researching a book tentatively titled The Chambers Connection: Medicine as Weapon. Her abandoned car was discovered near the Maryland facility, where records suggest Ellen Chambers had once been held. The case remains unsolved. The story of Ellen Chambers and Thomas Running Bear represents more than just a wartime tragedy or government cover-up. It stands as testament to how easily principles can be sacrificed in the name of security, and how individuals caught in the machinery of power can be erased not just from life, but from history itself. Dr. Sarah Running Bear now leads a foundation dedicated to documenting the contributions of Native American soldiers whose actions went unrecognized due to the classified nature of their service. In a 2024 interview, she reflected on her grandfather's legacy. He never stopped searching for justice, even when it nearly cost him everything. Our family stories say that in his final years, he would sometimes speak to someone only he could see, a woman in a nurse's uniform who stood by his bedside. My grandmother believed he was already glimpsing the other side, reconnecting with comrades who had gone before him. Sarah paused, then added, "But I think Ellen Chambers found a way to reach him, to let him know she remembered his kindness in that courtyard. Some bonds transcend even the darkest attempts to sever them." In a small, unmarked grave in the main facility where Eleanor Caldwell spent her final decades, groundskeepers report that eagle feathers occasionally appear, left by no known visitor. Local Penobscot tribal members, when discreetly asked about this phenomenon, merely smile and speak of old promises being kept across the boundaries of both time and world. The Defense Department continues to deny any operation called Nightshade ever existed. When presented with the accumulated evidence, Pentagon spokesperson Admiral James Harrison issued a statement in 2025. While the department acknowledges that certain classified operations from the World War II era remain sensitive due to ongoing security implications, we categorically reject any suggestion that American personnel were subjected to experimentation or unethical detention. Lieutenant Ellen Chambers died serving her country, and her sacrifice deserves better than to be tarnished by unfounded conspiracy theories. Yet the questions persist. Why does the village of Saint-Michel-sur-Marne remain restricted after 8 decades? Why do certain files related to the 21st Field Hospital remain classified beyond the standard 75-year limit? And why does the government maintain such interest in historians who inquire about a supposedly long-dead Army nurse? Perhaps most disturbing is the possibility that Ellen Chambers was not unique, that other inconvenient witnesses met similar fates, their very existence erased from all but the most deeply buried records. How many others might have been sacrificed on the altar of national security, their stories waiting to be discovered by those brave enough to look beyond official narratives? As we reflect on these dark possibilities, we would do well to remember Thomas Running Bear's own words from that letter to his brother. "I've come to believe that wars don't end when the treaties are signed. They continue in the silences, in the secrets kept, in the lies told to preserve comfortable truths. Maybe that's the real battlefield, not the ground fought over with guns and tanks, but the struggle for truth itself. And in that war, brother, I fear we're still losing." The sun sets over Arlington National Cemetery, where countless heroes rest beneath pristine white markers. Among them is a stone bearing the name Thomas Running Bear, his service to his country acknowledged with military honors. Not far away, in Section 31, there is a marker for Lieutenant Ellen Chambers, though those who know the truth understand it stands above empty earth. As darkness falls, visitors sometimes report seeing 2 figures walking slowly among the graves, a tall Native American soldier and a nurse in a white uniform. They appear deep in conversation, as if catching up after a long separation. By the time anyone approaches, however, the figures have vanished, leaving only the evening mist swirling between the silent stones. The truth about what happened in that French courtyard may never be fully known, but as long as questions remain unanswered and justice unserved, the ghosts of Ellen Chambers and Thomas Running Bear will continue their eternal patrol, reminding us that some betrayals cut too deep to ever truly heal, and that the greatest treason may be not what we do to our enemies, but what we are willing to do to our own. In these times of uncertainty and division, perhaps their story serves as both warning and inspiration, a reminder of the moral courage required to stand against injustice, even when it wears a familiar face. As we face our own challenges and choices, we might ask ourselves, which side of history would we have stood on? Would we have had the courage to recognize truth when power labeled it treason? As Thomas Running Bear once wrote, "The hardest thing isn't facing the enemy's guns. It's facing the mirror afterward, knowing what you did or failed to do, when everything that matters hung in the balance." If you found yourself moved by this forgotten chapter of our shared past, remember that there are countless other unsung heroes whose stories have been silenced by time and circumstance. Their voices echo in the darkness, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. Turn to God and Jesus Christ for guidance in these troubled times. For only through faith can we find the strength to confront difficult truths and stand firmly for what is right, even when it costs us everything. Just as Thomas Running Bear refused to abandon Ellen Chambers to her unjust fate, we too must refuse to abandon our moral compass when faced with the choice between comfortable lies and uncomfortable truths. In the silence between the official narrative and the whispered reality, listen carefully. The story of the Indigenous interpreter and the nurse branded a traitor reminds us that history is written not just by the victors, but by those with the power to silence dissent. Our task, as inheritors of this complex legacy, is to ensure that such silencing never becomes complete, that somewhere, somehow, truth finds its voice. And perhaps, like Thomas Running Bear searching the shadowed courtyard of Saint-Michel-sur-Marne, we might yet discover unexpected courage in the most unlikely places, and in doing so, become the heroes our troubled times so desperately need. The church bell in that forgotten French village may have fallen silent decades ago, but its echo continues to resonate for those willing to hear it. A reminder that some bonds cannot be broken, some truths cannot be buried, and some lights cannot be extinguished, no matter how deep the darkness that surrounds them. In the end, the greatest betrayal may not be what Ellen Chambers was accused of, but what was done to her in the name of the very freedom she had sworn to defend. And the greatest loyalty may be found not in blind obedience to authority, but in the quiet courage of those who, like Thomas Running Bear, refuse to look away from injustice, even when confronting it comes at the highest possible cost. For in the final accounting, we are defined not by the uniforms we wear or the oaths we take, but by the moral choices we make when faced with the stark divide between what is expedient and what is right. In that sacred space, the true measure of heroism is revealed, not in the medals displayed, but in the silent acts of conscience that may never be known beyond those directly touched by them. As dawn breaks over Saint-Michel-sur-Marne, the mist rises from the ground where a wooden post once stood in a courtyard, now reclaimed by nature. The sign that hung around Ellen Chambers's neck has long since rotted away. The accusation it bore faded like the official lies told to justify what followed. But something remains in that hallowed ground, something that calls to those with the wisdom to listen and the courage to act. The truth, like the spirits of Ellen Chambers and Thomas Running Bear, refuses to rest until justice is done. Their story, once buried beneath layers of classification and denial, now emerges into the light, a testament to both the darkness humans are capable of and the light that stubbornly persists even in our darkest hours. May we have the wisdom to learn from their example, and the courage to ensure such betrayals are never again committed in our name.